My wife admitted she cheated with the pastor who married Uso. I made sure his church got a copy of the screenshots. I remember the day we met like it was yesterday. There was this instant connection, the kind that feels like the universe finally decided to stop messing around. Sarah had this effortless charm. She laughed at my jokes, even the bad ones, and always had a way of making me feel like I was the only person in the room. We spent hours talking about our dreams, where we wanted to live, the kind of life we imagined together. I loved how ambitious she was, how she encouraged me to pursue my own goals without ever making me feel judged. Everything felt perfect, almost too perfect. Our friends couldn't stop talking about how compatible we were. Every time we went out, someone would say, "You two are literally made for each other." Even my parents were smitten. They loved her energy, her warmth, the way she treated me like I was the center of her world. I trusted her completely, not just with my heart, but with my life. I shared things with her that I hadn't even told my closest friends. My fears, my ambitions, my family struggles. I was sure she'd always have my back no matter what. Looking back, there were tiny things I should have noticed. The way she lingered a little too long talking to certain men, always complimenting their wisdom or kindness. It seemed harmless at the time, just playful banter. She teased me about being jealous, and I laughed it off thinking I was just overthinking. Even at our engagement party, I remember her chatting with the pastor for a little longer than normal, laughing at some joke I didn't hear. At the time, it didn't register as anything significant. I was blinded by how perfect everything seemed. Convinced that Sarah and I were untouchable, I was completely in love, completely trusting, and completely unaware that the first cracks in our fairy tale were already forming. Things didn't start falling apart suddenly. It was more like tiny cracks slowly forming in a wall I didn't even realize was there. It happened about 6 months into our marriage. Sarah started texting more at odd hours, always quick to hide her phone when I walked by. At first I told myself it was probably work or friends, nothing to worry about. But there was this nagging feeling I couldn't shake. Like my intuition was waving a red flag I didn't want to see. Then there were the little comments she'd make about the pastor. "He's so insightful, don't you think?" She'd say casually, almost like it was harmless praise. Or, "You should hear what Pastor James suggested for couples growth. So smart." I laughed it off, told myself it was just admiration, but something in her tone made my stomach twist. I started noticing how her eyes would light up a bit too much when she mentioned him. Kind of excitement I'd never seen for anything else outside of us. Friends began mentioning it too. "Sarah seems distracted lately," one friend whispered over coffee. Another joked, "Careful, she's probably got a crush on Pastor James." I laughed along, trying to pretend it didn't bother me, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Even family noticed her slight withdrawal. It's the way she seemed less present at dinners or more preoccupied with her phone. I started asking myself questions I didn't want the answers to. Was I imagining things? Was I just being paranoid? Every instinct I had told me something was off, but love and denial are a powerful mix. I didn't want to believe the person I trusted most could be hiding anything from me, despite the unease. I clung to the memories of how things started: her laughter, her encouragement, our shared dreams. I told myself that love was about trust, that I should just give her space, and that everything would probably be fine. But deep down, a tension was building, and I had no idea just how badly it would escalate in the coming months. This happened about 8 months into our marriage, and by then, I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was seriously wrong. It wasn't one thing, it was a pattern. Sarah started avoiding notifications on her phone, always flipping the screen down whenever I walked into the room. Sometimes she would step out just for a minute and come back much later than expected, claiming she'd lost track of time. I remember the first time I noticed she was deleting messages. I didn't know why at the moment, but a cold knot of suspicion started growing in my stomach. It wasn't just the secrecy. There was the way she praised the pastor in casual conversation, dropping little comments that made my chest tighten. "Pastor James gave such a meaningful message today," she'd say. Or, "Now you should really listen to what he suggested for couples growth." At first I brushed it off as admiration, but there was a subtle tone in her voice, a mix of excitement and reverence, that made me uneasy. Something about it felt too personal, too intimate for just a casual remark. I started noticing more signs from the people around me. Friends asked in hushed tones if everything between Sarah and me was okay. They mentioned that she seemed distant, distracted, or unusually cheerful after church. My own family asked if I'd noticed the little changes, but I laughed them off, insisting that I was overthinking. Still, doubt gnawed at me constantly. At night, lying in bed next to her, I would replay every moment. Every word, every glance, trying to see the truth in plain sight. Something about her behavior didn't fit anymore. My gut told me the cracks were no longer small. They were spreading, threatening to split everything I thought was solid. I felt powerless and blind, trapped between wanting to trust her and fearing what I might discover. It was in these small, unsettling moments that I realized this wasn't just about late-night texts or subtle comments. It was something much darker. Something that would soon shatter the life I thought I knew by the time I finally confronted Sarah. I was a mix of nerves and anger I couldn't fully contain. I remember standing in our kitchen, heart pounding, hands trembling slightly as I tried to find the right words. "Sarah, can we talk?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my voice probably betrayed me. She looked up smiling, expecting something small or mundane. I swallowed hard and went for it. "I've noticed some things. Your texts, the way you've been acting around the pastor. I need the truth." At first she laughed it off, the easy, playful Sarah I had fallen in love with. "You're imagining things," she said lightly, rolling her eyes. "You're just jealous of Pastor James or overthinking everything." I felt my chest tighten, the familiar warmth of denial tugging at me. I wanted to believe her, to trust her explanations, but every instinct screamed otherwise. I pressed harder. I asked her to explain why she seemed so distant, why she spent hours texting late at night, why she got defensive the moment I mentioned him. Her laugh faltered for a split second, and that's the moment the first real crack showed. There was a hesitation, a pause that told me everything words couldn't. She quickly recovered, blaming work stress, church commitments, and my paranoia. But the subtle slip came when she commented about the pastor during our conversation. She said something like, "Well, he's just always there to give advice. You know how supportive he is." That tone, the almost personal admiration, made my stomach drop. It wasn't just admiration anymore. Something in her eyes told me she was hiding far more than I wanted to imagine. I remember standing there, feeling a mix of confusion, fear, and heartbreak. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I also knew I had to be careful. This confrontation was just the beginning. The walls I thought surrounded my marriage were already crumbling, and I had no idea how much devastation was coming. I'll never forget the moment I saw the messages. It started innocently enough. I just wanted to see if my suspicions were crazy. I picked up her phone when she left it on the counter for a second, my hand shaking as I unlocked it. What I found made my stomach drop and my hands go numb. There they were, dozens of messages between Sarah and Pastor James. At first, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. They weren't just friendly or casual. They were intimate, flirtatious, and at times, outright sexual. My mind refused to process it. I scrolled back through months of conversations, each message stabbing like a knife. There were confessions of desire, secret meetings, and her admitting things to him that she'd never even hinted at with me. The betrayal hit in waves. I felt anger, disbelief, humiliation, and an ache I couldn't describe. I sat there, frozen, staring at the screen. Wondering if this was some twisted dream I could wake up from, I tried to rationalize, to find some explanation, but there was none. The timeline matched the moments I had felt her distance. The nights she claimed were spent working or running errands. Every lie I had unknowingly believed was laid bare in black and white. It was like watching my life unravel before my eyes. Asterisk. I felt the urge to confront her immediately, to throw the phone across the room and demand answers, but part of me froze. I needed clarity, I needed proof, and I needed to decide what I was going to do next. I couldn't let my emotions drive me into saying or doing something I would regret later. Sitting there, The betrayal overwhelming me, I realized that my life as I knew it had changed forever. Sarah, the woman I thought I'd spend my life with, had been hiding the deepest possible betrayal from me, and it wasn't just personal. It was intertwined with the person we had trusted most to guide us, the pastor who married us. My mind raced with what steps to take next. I couldn't just sit there and let this go. The betrayal was too deep, too personal, and I knew I had to take control of the situation. I spent that night thinking, pacing, and writing down every detail I could remember, every suspicious comment, every late-night absence, every little slip that had hinted at her affair. Then I realized that if I wanted to confront Sarah and have any chance of justice, I needed proof that she couldn't deny the next day. I started gathering screenshots of every incriminating message. I made sure to include timestamps, the back-and-forth conversations, and even the parts where she admitted meetings or secret thoughts about Pastor James. It felt surreal, almost like documenting evidence for a crime scene. Every screenshot I took tightened the knot in my stomach, but it also gave me a strange sense of power control in a situation where I had felt completely powerless for months. I also backed everything up to a secure drive and took notes on patterns, places, and times. I wanted to be ready for any confrontation, armed with irrefutable proof. The more I documented, the more the reality of the betrayal sank in. But at the same time, I began to see a path forward. I realized that this wasn't just about exposing Sarah. It was about holding the pastor accountable for his role in destroying our marriage, even as anger boiled inside me. I reminded myself to stay calm. Acting impulsively could ruin my chances of making a statement that mattered, of actually getting justice instead of just venting. I told myself this was about evidence, about clarity, about taking back the narrative that had been stolen from me. By the end of that week, I had compiled everything meticulously. Screenshots, notes, timelines. I had built a complete record of the affair. And as I looked at it all, I felt the first flicker of determination. I wasn't going to let this slide, and I was going to make sure the people responsible understood the consequences of their betrayal by this point. I was living a double life. To Sarah, I was calm, collected, acting like nothing had changed. I smiled, I joked, I went about our routines as if everything was normal. But behind that mask, I was watching her every move, noticing the little tells I'd missed before. The way she flinched when I mentioned the pastor, the subtle defensiveness in her tone, quick deletion of notifications at all, confirmed what I already knew. I started testing her reactions carefully. I'd casually bring up church, couples counseling, or things Pastor James had supposedly suggested, watching her face for cracks. Sometimes she overcompensated, talking a little too much, laughing a little too hard, trying to make everything seem ordinary. Other times she froze for just a second, and I could see the guilt swimming in her eyes before she caught herself. It was maddening and heartbreaking all at once. Friends and family noticed subtle changes too, though none of them knew the full story. They commented on how tense our marriage had become, how Sarah seemed distracted. I smiled and nodded, giving plausible explanations, all the while knowing the truth no one else suspected. It was exhausting, emotionally and mentally. The anger, betrayal, and hurt were like a constant weight on my chest. But I forced myself to stay composed. There was a strange satisfaction in seeing her guilt manifest. Knowing that she couldn't hide it forever, at the same time, I felt the tension building inside me, a mix of anticipation and dread. The plan I had been carefully crafting, the confrontation, the exposure, was slowly coming into focus. Every subtle slip, every defensive glance, was a confirmation that I was on the right track by the end of that week. I realized something chilling. I had all the proof. She was giving herself away, and the moment to act was approaching. I had to wait just a little longer to make sure the timing was perfect, to make sure the impact would be undeniable. I wasn't ready to explode yet, but the storm inside me was growing louder by the day, by the time Part 8 unfolds. I had reached a point I never thought I'd get to, the kind of despair that makes you question everything about yourself. I couldn't eat properly, sleep properly, or focus on work. Every time I looked at Sarah, I saw the woman I loved and trusted, and right next to her, the betrayal that had hollowed me out. It wasn't just the affair, it was the years of trust, the dreams, the plans we'd made that now felt like lies. Friends called, worried about me. They said I looked exhausted, haunted even. I laughed and brushed it off, insisting everything was fine, but inside I was crumbling. Every moment she went about life as if nothing had happened, the laughing, the casual conversations, the church gatherings, it felt like salt in a wound I couldn't bandage. I'd catch her on the phone sometimes, quickly hiding messages, and it made my stomach twist with helplessness. I was a spectator in my own life, watching someone I loved destroy everything we had at night. Alone in our bedroom, I'd replay every detail of the past months. All the times I trusted her implicitly, all the moments I confided in her, the humiliation, the heartbreak, the sense of being utterly invisible in my own marriage, hit harder than I ever imagined. I questioned whether I had failed somehow, whether I had missed signs, whether I deserved any of this. It was a rock-bottom kind of despair, the moment where anger, grief, and betrayal collide into a single, crushing weight. I wanted to scream, to cry, to break something, or maybe even someone. But I knew I had to hold it together. Despite the wreckage inside me, I realized that acting impulsively now could ruin any chance at justice or closure. I had to stay patient, focused, and deliberate, and in that dark, suffocating place, a tiny spark of resolve started to flicker. I wouldn't stay broken. I wouldn't let this define me. I was gathering the pieces, waiting for the right moment to strike back, and when I did, everything would change. The day I finally confronted Sarah was one of the most intense moments of my life. I sat her down in the living room, my hands steady, but my chest pounding like a drum. "We need to talk," I said calmly, though every fiber of me was screaming. She looked at me, smiling nervously, probably expecting a small argument or another one of my worries about trivial things. I took a deep breath and slid my phone across the coffee table, showing her the messages, the screenshots, timestamps. In every single admission she had made to Pastor James at first, she tried to laugh it off, insisting that I was reading too much into things. "It's not what it looks like," she said, her voice a mix of nervousness and feigned innocence. But the denial didn't last long. As I calmly went through the evidence, pointing out each secret meeting and every flirtatious comment, I saw the mask slip. Her eyes widened, her hands shook, and for the first time, she didn't have an explanation. Tears welled up in her eyes as she finally admitted the truth. She had been seeing him for months, lying to me, manipulating me, and treating our marriage like it was nothing. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. I wanted to shout, cry, scream. Everything I had been holding in came bubbling to the surface. But I stayed silent, letting her see that I wasn't broken, that I was in control of the moment. Then I told her exactly what I planned to do with the evidence. I didn't yell, I didn't beg. Guy just stated the facts. She paled, realizing that this betrayal wouldn't remain private, that the pastor and everyone in the church would soon know the truth. I could feel the shift in power. The fear in her eyes was almost satisfying. After months of humiliation and heartbreak, it was the culmination of months of suspicion, betrayal, and despair. In that moment, I was no longer just a victim. I was someone who had taken control of the narrative, ready to make sure justice was served. Once I had Sarah's reluctant confession, I knew it was time to take the next step. I gathered every screenshot, every time-stamped message, and carefully drafted a concise, factual email to the church leadership. I didn't embellish, I didn't rant, I just presented the truth as clearly and indisputably as possible. My hands were steady, but my heart was racing. I knew this would spark chaos, and I was ready for it. Within hours, the reactions started. I got confirmation that the church had received the evidence. From what I heard through whispers and messages from mutual friends, there were immediate meetings among the leadership. Pastor James was called in to explain himself, and the higher-ups were in shock. The tension in the congregation was palpable. People who had trusted him now felt betrayed, confused, and angry. It wasn't long before the scandal started spreading beyond the church walls. Meanwhile, Sarah tried to play it off, insisting it wouldn't go anywhere, that no one would believe her, and the pastor had influence. But I had anticipated that. The proof was overwhelming, irrefutable. She could no longer hide behind charm, excuses, or laughter. Every lie, every secret meeting, every text, everything was documented. Asterisk, I remember sitting back at home, watching the fallout unfold with a strange mix of relief, vindication, and lingering heartbreak. Part of me still mourned the life I thought I had, the trust that was shattered, and the love that was corrupted. But another part of me felt a rush of empowerment, the sense that I had finally taken control of the narrative, that the betrayal could no longer stay hidden. It was a surreal experience, seeing the people I trusted turn their eyes on the pastor, realizing the magnitude of what had been done. For the first time since discovering the affair, I felt the scales of justice start to balance. And though the emotional wounds were deep, the first step toward closure had been taken. The aftermath was chaotic, but in a way it was almost cathartic. Pastor James was called out publicly by the church leadership, facing serious scrutiny, questioning, and shame from the congregation. Rumors spread fast, and people I hadn't expected to notice suddenly approached me, expressing sympathy and support. Sarah was left reeling, caught between guilt, embarrassment, the reality that her lies could no longer be hidden. I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, vindication, and lingering heartbreak. The betrayal still stung, but seeing the consequences unfold gave me a sense of justice I hadn't felt in months. Friends and family reached out more consistently, offering comfort, encouragement, and reminders that I wasn't alone in this. Their support made me feel like I could breathe again, like the weight of her deceit had finally lifted just a little. I also spent time reflecting on the lessons this experience had taught me. Trust is sacred, and once broken, it can't simply be repaired. But I realized that my response, calm, deliberate, and evidence-based, was what kept me from being completely consumed by anger. I learned that taking control of a situation doesn't always mean retaliation in the moment. Sometimes it's about patience, clarity, and precision. I slowly started reclaiming parts of my life that had been neglected. I focused on work, hobbies, and reconnecting with friends who had drifted during the months of secrecy and despair. Each small step reminded me that my life wasn't defined by her betrayal, it was defined by how I chose to respond. By the end of this chapter, I could finally feel a sense of emotional release. The storm of humiliation, rage, and grief had passed, leaving me with clarity and a renewed sense of self. I had survived the worst, and the power to rebuild and move forward was entirely mine. By the time I reached this stage, I finally felt like I was reclaiming my life. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the sleepless nights, they were all behind me, or at least behind the part of me that had felt powerless. I realized that surviving something this devastating didn't just mean enduring, it meant learning, growing, and refusing to let it define who I was. I started setting boundaries I should have established long ago. It's not just with Sarah, but with everyone in my life. I learned to trust cautiously, to value my own judgment, and to listen to that gut instinct I'd ignored for far too long. The incident with Pastor James in the church became a harsh but important lesson in awareness, accountability, and personal strength. I realized that I didn't need validation from anyone who had betrayed me. I only needed to believe in myself and my ability to move forward. There were still moments of sadness. Of course, memories of the life I thought I had, the dreams that were shattered, and the person I trusted most, cutting me deeply. They lingered. But over time, those memories became less painful and more instructive. They reminded me why I could never ignore red flags again, why honesty and transparency were non-negotiable, and why self-respect is the foundation of any relationship. I began to rebuild my life with intention, focusing on my career, hobbies, friendships, and self-improvement. I allowed myself to dream again, cautiously at first, but with hope that genuine love and trust could exist without betrayal. I didn't rush into anything, but I opened myself to the possibility of happiness on my own terms. Looking back, the entire ordeal was a turning point. I had faced the deepest betrayal imaginable, confronted it head-on, and emerged not only unbroken but stronger, wiser, and more self-assured. The storm had passed, and I was finally free to live my life unapologetically, with a clear heart and a sharper sense of who I was. I am no longer the same person who blindly trusted and ignored the signs. I am someone who survived, learned, and moved on, and I know now that nothing can take that power away.